Right, this video looks at electrolysis. Electrolysis is a big topic, so I'm going to make a number of videos to cover the various sections. What this video looks like is the keywords that you come across in electrolysis, and then I'll look at the basic setup of an electrolysis experiment. Now, let's look at the main word, electrolysis. What is electrolysis? Electrolysis involves the breaking up of ionic substances into simpler substances by passing electricity through it. Okay, so it involves the breaking up of ionic substances. Okay, ionic substance into simpler substances by passing electricity through them. Okay, so we want to split up ionic substance by passing electricity through them. Now, the word lysis means to split. So what we're doing in electrolysis essentially is to split up ionic substances into simpler substances by passing electricity through them. Okay, and that brings me to the next keyword, electrolyte. Now, electrolyte, we say, is a liquid which breaks up into ions when we pass when electricity is passed through it. When electricity is passed through it. Okay, so an electrolyte is a liquid which breaks up or decomposes into ions when electricity is passed through it. Now, what does this mean? Now, if you look back at the definition of electrolysis, we are trying to split up anionic substances into simpler substances by passing electricity through it. Now, that ionic substance which we want to break into simpler substance must first be dissolved in water. Now, what happens is that when we dissolve it in water, the ions are therefore free to move around and to carry the electric current that we will pass through it. Now, once we dissolve the ionic substance in water, we get electrolyte. Okay, so for example, if you take a common ionic substance like sodium chloride, which consists of sodium 1 plus and chloride 1 minus. Now, before we can conduct an electrolysis of sodium chloride, we must first dissolve it in water, and then once it's in water, the ions are free to move around. The sodium ion and the chloride ions that will be then free to move around. And once we dissolve the ionic substance in water, we get electrolyte. Because when we pass electricity through the electrolyte, they are able to spread into its constituent ions. Okay, so electrolyte is a liquid which breaks up into ions when electricity is passed through it, and essentially is the ionic substance that we are trying to spread into simpler substances by passing electricity through it. Now with this, we now come to another term called cation. Cations. Now if you look at the sodium as an example of ionic substance, it consists of positive sodium ion and negative chloride ion. Now the positive ion is called cation. So cation is what? Positive ion. And the negative ion is anion. Anion is negative ions. Okay, so we have ionic substance, we are trying to spread them into its constituent ions by passing electricity through it. But we must first dissolve it in what? Water, or melt it. Once we dissolve it in water or melt it, we get an electrolyte. Okay, now that electrolyte consists of what? Ions. The ions will be positive and negative because ionic substances are made of positive and negative ions. The positive ion is called cation and the negative ion is called anion. Okay, right, so the positive ion is called cation and the negative ion is called anion. And that brings us to the next key term, cathode. Cathode. Now let me first of all deal with electrode. Electrode is the conductor that conducts the electricity through the electrolyte. Okay, so it's the conductor that conducts the electricity through the electrolyte. Right? So the electrode is the conductor. Now we will look at the setup very soon. Is the conductor that we place in the electrolyte to carry the current through the solution. Okay, now with that we come to cathode, which is the negative electrode. Okay, is the negative electrode. The cathode is the negative electrode and the anode is the positive electrode. Right, so if we got ionic substance, we want to spread it into simpler substance by passing electricity through it. Now to do that, we must first of all dissolve it in water. Once we dissolve it in water, we get what? Electrolyte. We put electrodes into the electrolyte and connect the electrolyte with a cell, turn it on, current pass through it, and because of that, the cations will move to the various electrode, anions will move to its respective electrode. We'll come to that and look at the whole concept and the principle underlying electrolysis deeper when in our next video. For now, that is the keywords we want to look at. Now let's look at a basic setup of an electrolysis experiment. Let's look at this one. Right, so let's continue with a basic setup of an electrolysis experiment. What is it made of? Remember, we talked about electrode, we talked about positive electrode, negative electrode, and we also looked at what electrolysis and electrolyte. Now for an electrolysis experiment, we're going to have a beaker which contains the electrolyte here. Okay, now inside the beaker we will place our electrode. Remember, we said that the electrode are the conductors that conduct the electricity through the electrolyte. So we're going to have our electrodes here in the beaker. Now inside beaker we will have our electrolyte. Okay, let me pick. We have got our electrolyte. Remember that the electrolyte is the solution, the liquid version of our ionic substance, and therefore they will contain ions, positive and negative ions. So we're going to have positive ion and negative ions inside the electrolyte. Okay, so we got our positive and negative ions inside the electrolyte. Okay, so we dip our electrode inside our electrolyte, right? Now we then connect the electrode to our cell, which is normally a battery. Alright, so that is our cell is connected to our electrode. We got our beaker here. The solution is the electrolyte, right? These two are the electrode. Now if you look at the cell, you see that we connect the negative terminal to the negative electrode, which is what? The cathode. So this will be cathode. And we connect the positive terminal to our positive electrode, which is the anode. Right? So if you go our anode, cathode, our cell, yeah, the whole of this is the cell. So a basic electrolysis setup will consist of a cell, a cathode, anode or the electrode, the beaker, and then inside the beaker we got our electrolyte in there. In the next video, I'll look at what happened during the electrolysis, which ion goes to which electrode, and what principles underline their movement. Okay,